Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to New York's longest running sports call-in show, One on One. I'm Kris Pursiainen here with Alex Wolz, joined today by a very special guest who is here to talk to us about the New York Giants and specifically about Mr. Eli Manning, who has his name in the news this week for a lot of good reasons. Tom Rock is here. He's been covering sports for Newsday since 1996. He's been on the Giants beat since 2008. And he wrote a book about the Giants, Miracle Moments in New York Giants football history, best plays, games, and records. It came out in 2019. Tom, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you?
Thanks, guys. I'm doing really well. Unfortunately, there haven't been a lot of memorable plays, games, and moments in Giants history since that book came out. But hey, maybe this weekend will provide something.
Man, I thought that game against Washington would be, they always beat Washington. They didn't beat Washington. So this season has started off a little bit interestingly, and that's what I wanted to get right into in our first question for you, which is a callback to Joe Judge's introductory press conference. I remember being in high school in my history class, not paying attention, hiding in an AirPod so I could listen to Joe Judge because I was so excited. One of the points he hammered home, and I just brought this up on our football podcast, NFL Friday, is that he was going to deliver on the Giants not beating themselves. The Giants were not going to beat themselves. They were going to be an organized, disciplined team who were not going. If they lost a game, it was going to be because the other team outplayed them. This season, we've seen a fair share of struggles with penalties and things of the sort. Do you see this as an indictment on Judge, or your thoughts on Judge so far throughout his tenure and just delivering on those promises?
Well, indictment's a pretty strong word, but I will say that was a very that game against Washington was the antithesis of what Joe Judge wants this team to be. And he always talks about you have to learn how to not lose before you can learn how to win. And the Giants lost that game. I mean, there was so many opportunities for them to take control of it early on, and then obviously it comes down to, listen, there's 0:00 on the game clock, right? It says the scoreboard says Giants 29, Washington football team 27. It's a win. It's in the books. And then but the flag comes out and they get to re-kick that field goal from 5 yards shorter. They make it, and it's a Giants loss. It was a devastating loss for a team that keeps finding new and creative ways to break the hearts of their fan base. And it was probably, like I said, the most anti-Joe Judge game that we've seen so far of the, 18 now that he's coached.
Yep.
And you talk about the Giants having, with that loss to Washington, starting off 0-2 once again, feels like a really familiar story. And I'm curious, if we talk about the Washington game specifically, you get a good start from Daniel Jones, all things considered, and you still can't come out on top in that game. What do you think has kind of been the main reason why the Giants have struggled so much here in the early season, despite some things even going right in certain ways?
Well, it's an inability to finish, really. I mean, they have a lot of long drives. They have a lot of good possessions, 10 plays, 11 plays. Sometimes they don't get any points out of them. Sometimes they have to settle for field goals. You look at, that game on last Thursday in particular. They had a long touchdown run by Jones called back by a penalty. They had to settle for a field goal. They had the play in the end zone that Darius Slayton probably should have caught. Could have been a little bit of a better throw. Could have been a much better catch. That's a touchdown that you take off the board. There was another drive early on that they were in field goal range. They got pushed back and they wound up punting. And then you look at the end of the game after the interception by James Bradbury. They run the ball twice, throw an incompletion, and have to settle for a field goal with 2 minutes left. So there were a lot of points that they left on the board. Now, you can say that if you want to be a silver lining person, which it's hard for Giants fans to be these days, you could say that was really a coming out party for this offense. They put up a lot of yards. They had a lot of drives. They showed some creativity. They got Daniel Jones running with the ball. He had a great game throwing the ball, I thought. Saquon Barkley had a nice long run. There was a lot of positives to take away from that game. but they didn't find the end zone often enough, and they lost. So it's really, it's hard to say that they made all these strides and still came up short, because that's the result that matters, and that's how this season is going to be judged. Last season was sort of a feeling out process for Joe Judge and a search to figure out if Daniel Jones was going to be the quarterback for them moving forward. This year is about winning, and so far they obviously haven't.
I have kind of a two-pronged question related both to what you were talking about in regards to the play calling and the utilization of Jones. And then the Giants, I don't want to say infamous. I think it's too early for that, but their first round pick, Kadarius Toney. In regards to Jason Garrett and the offense and the strategy behind the play calling, and also in regards to Kenny Golladay potentially needing limited reps this week, do you think the staff continues to go with CJ Board, or do you think we finally start to see Toney get some opportunity? And parallel with that is, do you think that if Toney were to get this opportunity, perhaps it might be the jolt that the offense needs, that inspiration to get some more creative play calling going, or is it going to be curls and dives?
Yeah. Well, I'll say this about Kadarius Toney. I do think he's going to be utilized a lot more in this game. I don't think it's going to be because of anything that Kenny Golladay does. I mean, they are just such different weapons. I mean, they almost play different positions, when you look at what they can do on the field. So, it's not like, Kenny Golladay is our wide receiver number one, and Kadarius is behind him on the depth chart. So it's just the next man up. It's just not that simple. So while Kadarius, Kenny, I get my K's confused. While Kenny is going to be limited and probably not play the whole game, and that was something that the wide receivers coach talked about today, was he needs to probably play him a few less snaps during the game just to have him fresher, because he missed so much of the preseason. I don't think that necessarily means Kadarius steps in. CJ Board, maybe Slayton a little bit more. It could mean that Sterling Shepard plays a little bit more on the outside, which I think would be a mistake, because he's doing so well playing from that slot position. So
killing it.
Yeah. I mean, he leads the league in receptions right now, which is pretty impressive. I know it's only 2 weeks, but still, it's a pretty good group that he's in, and certainly a good start to a season for him after what was probably his best preseason of his career. So it's just to get back to the original question about Kadarius. I like the kid. I think he's edgy. I think he brings a lot to this team, personality wise. I think he's a fighter. I think he's got some personality that the Giants probably need a little bit more of, the spark, that kind of energy. He's got to be a little bit more careful on social media, but we probably all do. And he's but that doesn't seem to bother him. It doesn't ruffle him. The other day he talked about the elephant in the room that he's with the posts he made on Instagram that seemed to express some displeasure in his role with the Giants, and calling some of the reporters clowns. Listen, some of us are clowns. I'm not going to deny that. I've done some clownish things in the past, but those are things that go away the second he makes one good juke, the second he takes a punt and returns it for 30 yards, or takes a quick swing pass and makes a tackler miss and gets down the field for a first down. So I'm not too worried about Kadarius Toney living up to the hype. He was going to be a raw wide receiver anyway coming in. Eventually he's going to, I think by the end of the year, we're going to look back on this and say, it was kind of silly, all the things we were talking about with him back in August and September.
Yeah, and you wrote a recent article about how Kadarius Toney is like the guy who needs a big play more than anybody else, and that's going to be the thing to kind of cure a lot of these conversations. So we'll see what happens on the wide receiving front, but I'm curious to ask you about the running front, because you also wrote a really interesting story the other day about how Daniel Jones at this point has been a more effective runner on the ground than Saquon Barkley, which is just fascinating if you were to have said that 2-3 years ago. And I'm just curious for you, what you've made of Barkley so far this season, just those 83 yards on the ground through 2 games and half of that coming on 1 carry alone. And there's been a lot of people, at least in our circles here in New York, talking about, questions about his consistency, about his running style, about his health. Is he worth the number 2 pick? Going all these different lengths after just 2 games. And I'm curious what your feelings are on Barkley and how he'll kind of transpire this season after what you've seen so far this season.
He'd make a really good modern day Major League Baseball player. A lot of home runs, a lot of strikeouts. That and not a lot in between. So that's kind of Saquon Barkley's place right now. The thing that best illustrates to me where Saquon Barkley is right now is you look at the end of the Washington game, and they run the ball twice after that interception and get killed for being too conservative. And it wasn't too long ago that getting the ball in the hands of Saquon Barkley twice inside the 20-yard line would have been the go-to move. That a coach would have been killed for not getting Saquon more involved in that situation. So, the fact that Saquon, giving it to Saquon, is now considered throwing away downs is really amazing. Is he ever going to be the player he was when he was the Rookie of the Year? I don't know. I don't know. Is he going to be better than he has been the first 2 weeks? I'm pretty confident that that's the case. Yeah, he's gonna get back to a level that is starting running back caliber in this league. I don't think he's ever going to lead the league in rushing. I don't think he's ever going to have 90 plus catches like he did as a rookie. But I think he's going to be a really good running back, and teams need players like that. And he's always going to have that danger of the home run ball, and that's going to be something that you just kind of wait and hope comes at the right time for him. But he's coming back from an ACL injury that was more than an ACL. I mean, he had a lot of damage done to his knee last year.
Several tears.
Yeah, and he is not. He's not fully back. He played 2 games within 5 days. His first games. He's had a lot of rest now. My guess is that like Kadarius Toney, pretty soon we're going to start to put away those stories of Saquon Barkley off the field, start talking about what he's doing on the field. And my guess is that while it's fun to say right now that Daniel Jones leads the team in rushing, by the end it's going to be Saquon Barkley at the top of that list.
Need a 140 breakout game this week so he can get closer to the top of those rankings.
That's right.
I have one final question about this current Giants team before we shift our focus a little bit back in time and reminisce. In regards to the team's philosophy about how far they're willing to go to be competitive this year. For example, Shane Lemieux, if he has a shot to return in the middle of the season, he could have gotten the surgery at the start of the year and returned halfway through the year, but he played through it. And I'm curious about, as the trade deadline begins to potentially loom above us like the news monster that it is, what do you think the team's philosophy might be, not just in regards to the trade deadline, but in regards to this season going into the trade deadline? Buying, selling, neither, looking to just squeeze out every win? Do they see the Bears pick as sufficient cushion? Or
well, I think it's going to depend a lot on where a lot of teams are at that time as they get closer, and I'm talking about the teams in the division. I don't think the Giants are going to be competing for a wild card spot, even though there's a couple of them out there, obviously in the NFC. Listen, their pathway to the postseason, which is where they want to be this year, is through the division. And if the division is anything close to what it was last year, which was dismal and dysfunctional and downright awful, where the Giants were 6-10 at the end of the season and still had a chance to win it, a very good chance to win it, in fact. Then I think they'll start to make a push for it. If they're not, if they start to fade and the Cowboys run away with things, I think they'll start to look to the long term. And Joe Judge has that luxury of looking to the long term. I'm not sure the general manager Dave Gettleman does. if this season doesn't work out, my sense is that he's going to be swapped out for another general manager, probably somebody that Joe Judge has worked with in New England or at some point along his career in college, going by all the hires he makes of people he's worked with on his coaching staff. So it'll be an interesting dynamic. You'll have one guy who says we got to look for the future, and the other guy says, well, if we don't win now, I don't have a future, and it's gonna be very, very interesting to see how that plays out. John Mara is gonna have to broker that in some way, I would think, and my guess is that it'll be in the direction of the head coach who they think is going to stick around for a pretty long time.
Yeah, and then kind of on that note, because of all those storylines, there's kind of a must-win game you could call it this weekend against the Falcons, a winnable game for the Giants. Even this early in the season, I feel like that's not an over dramatization to say that. And my last quick hitter on the current Giants as well is just they're facing the Falcons this weekend. They've had a lot of trouble stopping tight ends this season, about to face a pretty darn good one in Kyle Pitts. I'm just curious what you expect from this game and what the Giants' chances are of winning it.
Yeah, I always have trouble calling games this early must wins, but this is a mustn't lose game. I mean, if they lose to the rebuilding Falcons here, another 0-2 team, and they're legitimately in the conversation for worst team in the league, and certainly most disappointing. I mean, you look at the Jaguars and the Jets, and they have rookie quarterbacks, and they're rebuilding. The Giants were supposed to be competitive at least, and so far they haven't been, or assuming that they lose this game, they will not have been. This is a game that they need to show up for, and last year after they lost that heartbreaker to the Eagles, they were able to bounce back, and that kind of turned their season around to the point where there was a lot of optimism towards the end. Hopefully this year, maybe they get that gut punch out of the way and react to it the same way and go off on a tear again. Who knows? On the other side of this Falcons game, there's not a lot of winnable games. You get at the Saints, at Dallas, and then all of a sudden you start looking at those Monday night games against the Chiefs and the Bucks. You talk about tight ends, man. I saw that Kelsey catch and run the other night. My first thought was that there's no way the Giants can stop that at any point in any way, in any scheme, with any players that they have. And so it's going to be interesting to see what Kyle Pitts does to them, how they react to that, how the defense comes out. That's been probably the most disappointing aspect of this team that we haven't really talked about. And if they can get that all important shot of vitamin W.
Man, that would be great. As a big Blue fan myself, I am very not secretly rooting for that result. We wanted to finish up today with just a look back into a period of the team that you had the honor of covering yourself. I mean, getting to see Eli Manning win at the highest level on the biggest stage against the greatest opponent probably possible. You can I would just love to hear you bask in the glory that is Eli. I'm a big fan myself. Do you think that this Monday Night Football adventure with Peyton will derail a shot of him staying around the team as an advisor? This is my homer question.
Well, his role isn't really advisor. He's more like an ambassador for the team. He does a lot of glad handing with the corporate sponsors and photo ops and ribbon cuttings and things like that. So he's not in there to do personnel moves and to advise on what draft picks they should make, and he doesn't want to. I spoke with him a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him, is there anything you'd like to do in terms of personnel? Would you like to become a general manager or a team president or something like that? And he said, I just don't want to sift through 60 college offensive lineman tapes to try to find the one guy who could play in the NFL. That's just not something he wants to invest his time in. So I think he's going to be Mr. Giant. He's going to be what Frank Gifford was for the second half of his life. I think Eli Manning is going to be that. Wherever he goes, he's going to tell the stories of his Super Bowl wins and the practical jokes that they played in the locker room there all those years, and all the great moments. And some people will bring up, of course, the bad moments. There was a lot of them towards the end, and he's going to shrug them off and say, I choose not to remember them. Which is what he usually says when I ask him about those dour times. But I don't think that. I think he's always going to be associated with the Giants. I think that's it's not going to be like Derek Jeter, who's now with the Marlins, or goes to another franchise or something like that. When he said at the end of his retirement ceremony, when he said, once a Giant, always a Giant. For me, it's only the Giants. I think that was probably the most from the heart thing you've ever heard Eli Manning say.
And the last question I wanted to ask on those notes that you said of the times you spoke with Manning or the conversations you've had with him, it's obviously been covering the team for over a decade now, witnessed the Super Bowl trophies. And was there a moment for you that, that you had with him, or something you remember in your coverage of him that really resonates with you as you look now as his name getting up in the Ring of Honor that kind of goes beyond just those stats, accolades, or the trophies?
Yeah, actually, it's kind of a funny story. So that year when he was benched for Geno Smith, and it was a very tumultuous week, obviously. And the day that the decision came out, Geno spoke to reporters and Eli spoke to reporters. And the next day I was in the locker room and I had a follow-up question for Geno that I just didn't have a chance to ask him at the press conference the other day. And I went up to him and I said, hey, can I ask you a real quick question? And he said, man, I just spoke yesterday. And in all the years I covered Eli Manning, he never blew me off. He never said, I don't have time for this. He was always there. He was always available, and he always provided a great answer. And really, that's all a sports writer can ask for is an honest response and availability. And it was at that moment, I think, when Geno blew me off that I realized how special it was to be able to cover Eli Manning for all those years.
That's great. I've said I'm a big Eli fan, so that's very Eli. I think taking that for granted is something that happened to me as well, just as someone who started watching sports when those Super Bowl runs occurred. I was literally basically born into this double ringed up Giants team led by this incredible I say this lovingly, Goof, who's just this locker room leader. And it was great to be able to pick your brain on your interactions with him and of course on the team in general. One last question, and that is in regards to this team this year. I'm going to put you on the spot, Tom. A one-word answer. That word is going to be a number, and it's the number of wins that you project the New York Giants to finish with. If you had $100 chip, you had to put down right now on a number.
7. I would have liked to have said 10 in honor of Eli Manning, but I got to go. I think 7. I was at 8 in the beginning of the season. I thought they would win one. I thought both of those first 2 games were winnable. Now that they lost both, I think they're a team that's designed in Joe Judge's design to get better as the season goes on. Whether or not they can do it well enough to get to that number of wins, or the number of wins, whatever it takes to win the division and get into the playoffs, we'll see. But I think 7's a pretty good number. It's better than last year, right?
Yes, sir. Tom, we can't thank you enough for your insight. It was great getting to speak to you again about Eli, about the team, and just such a pleasure to have you join us. For Kris Pursiainen and for Alex Wolz, we want to thank you guys very much for listening to this interview, and stay with us here on One as we get into the next segment.